Welcome, everyone. I'm Karen Rapp, director of LMU's LeBand Art Gallery, and I'm on the campus of Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Please join me in acknowledging LMU's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. This fall, I have had the privilege to guest curate the KaleidoLA series. And in doing so, I have curatorially centered artists whose artwork and lived experiences foreground issues of social, economic, and racial justice. All artists in this series identify as BIPOC, an acronym that stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, and several belong to LGBTQ communities. I consider this series to be a roadmap that can guide our work in the College of Communication and Fine Arts toward diversity, equity, and inclusion. Throughout John Bankston's talk today, I encourage you to use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen to ask questions and to make comments. At the conclusion of John Bankston's presentation, your questions will be read aloud by Molly Corey, the LeBand's gallery manager, and we will also share all your comments and questions with the artist after the session ends. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be archived on YouTube with a link available on the KaleidoLA website. I am delighted to introduce artist John Bankston. John lives and works in San Francisco, California. He has called the Bay Area his home for nearly 2 decades. He is a native of Michigan, and when he began his studies as an undergraduate at the University of Chicago, he was a biology major contemplating going to medical school. He also took art classes and met people studying art. While he ultimately finished his degree in biology, he entered the graduate program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where he earned his MFA in painting in 1990. John has developed what can be described as a signature style in which he borrows from the aesthetics excuse me, of coloring books, the ones we all know from our childhood. His figurative work features bold black lines, painterly brushwork, and a vivid palette. While the appearance of his work is indeed playful, the subject matter his work addresses speaks to the complexities of representation, specifically the identities of Black gay men. He has said, and I quote, "Using coloring books is something we all have in common. It is our first experience as visual creators. But when I was growing up, I saw very few African Americans in them," end quote. Working in series that function as visual journals, John's paintings and drawings feature Black male characters who embody and perform masculinities, thus widening our expectations of what it means to be an adult man. His figures wear costumes and exist in imaginary spaces, sometimes in groups, and lately, during the 2020 pandemic, they are depicted in solitary contemplation. In addition to solo shows in cities including Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and New York, John has been included in career-making group shows, such as the 2001 Freestyle at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the touring exhibition 30 Americans from the Rubel Family Collection in Miami, as well as Seeing Double, Encounters with Warhol from the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. He also holds awards from prestigious foundations, and his work is held in many museums and collections around the country, such as the Birmingham Museum of Art in Alabama, the D. Young Museum in San Francisco, the Johnson Museum at Cornell University, the Miami Art Museum, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, among many others. If you happen to be in Los Angeles right now, you can visit a show at Walter Maciel Gallery entitled Escape. It's a solo show of John's work, and it's open until October 31st. It is a great honor to have John Bankston as part of this fall series. I thank you for joining us, John, and I invite you to come to the virtual podium and to turn on your camera and your audio as I turn off mine. Thank you, everybody, for what is your time on a Friday and will be a wonderful conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction. So I'd like to start with a video that was done for a show, during a show at the Center for Disease Control, CDC, in Atlanta. And the show was called Watching Hands. And it was it was done in 2011 to 2012, 2011. And it was about the importance of hand washing for health. But in it, you'll see a little bit of my studio and a little bit of how I work. I've always been an artist, I think, in my heart, but I started out studying biology as an undergraduate and discovered that you could study art in school. I'm interested in the visual language of coloring books. It's a way to combine abstraction and figuration and drawing and painting. And also it's our first experience as visual creators. Everyone sort of has used a coloring book or done some scribbling in a coloring book. And so it's something we all sort of understand. This is really a treat to be able to make this work for the Watching Hands exhibit. I think it's really exciting to have an art gallery in a place that I think so much about as a science institution. So this is the first panel, and this is this character that I use occasionally, and I've given him the name Donkey Boy, and he sees this thing in the water, and he's really attracted to it, and he goes and he touches it. And as he makes his way more through the forest, his hands become these claws, and he sees these sort of new characters, these sort of bearded guys, and they end up helping him. They take him first to this ringleader who can't really help him, but he knows a guy who can help him, who's the magician. And then the magician will wash his hands and they'll be like new. I'm happy that the work is able to have a deeper meaning than just my own sort of fantasy world and my own narrative, that I'm able to sort of use my narrative process to inform people about an important health issue. I hope that people will think of me as sort of this person who can lead them through an imaginary world, but that also they can sort of see that there are real world implications, and people will think of me as a storyteller as well as an artist. So that was
2011. Um, and now I'd just like to talk a little bit about my work. I sort of think of all of my work as comprising a visual novel, and that each new body of work is another chapter in that novel. And it doesn't really exist with words. It's mostly with images, and the images generally are done in drawings. And I sort of think of the drawings as like the movie, and then I also make paintings that go with the drawings, and these would be sort of like posters or frames from the movie. Um, this whole thing started when I was doing a show here in San Francisco at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. And for that project, I decided I would try to make a sustained narrative. And I wanted to sort of use this idea of drawing and painting. And I thought maybe if I use sort of this coloring book way of approaching image making, that would be able to incorporate that idea of both abstraction and figuration and drawing and painting. And also, I like the sort of the narrative um, flow of coloring books, in that they're not necessarily linear. You can go back and forth in time. There are big leaps, and so I like that because it's kind of the way I think. Um, the drawings and the idea for the work, the drawings, usually I sort of think of them as like daydreams. So I usually just start with one drawing, and then the other images kind of follow. And so this chapter that I'll show, um, so anyway, I should go back and say that the whole work has a title. It's The Capture and Escape of Mr. M, or Tales from Rainbow Forest. And so it started with Mr. M, who's this sort of everyday man. He ends up being captured by Mr. L, who is this sort of combination pirate, motorcycle man, leather man. Um, and he has his alien henchmen come and capture Mr. M and take him back to Rainbow Forest. And then it's sort of about how Mr. M makes his way through Rainbow Forest. He escapes the clutches of Mr. L with the help of forest animals and creatures. And then the subsequent chapters are him making his way through Rainbow Forest. In this chapter, this is from 2015. This actually has two parts. In the first part, it's about these magicians, and you saw the magician in the watching hands. I like to reuse characters to sort of add a sense of continuity to the work. And so in this chapter, the magicians put this spell on this hat. And one of the magicians sort of meets with this, what I call the mysterious character, who, and they make this plan. And the mysterious character encounters Mr. M and takes him to the magician. And all the work is, the line is done with a thinned acrylic paint. And the color is watercolor and these watercolor sticks. And then also I make paintings that go along with the drawings. And this is one of the paintings. It's oil on linen. And this is another character. It's something I call the abstracticator. And it's this object that when any of the characters look at it, they change. So this is the second part, and so now Mr. M has the hat, and he is now the explorer, and so he sets off to explore other parts of Rainbow Forest. And as he makes his way through, he sees these sort of mechanical creatures, and they're sort of surveilling him. But he's also being surveilled by these other characters that I call the rabbit maskers. And he encounters them, and they greet him with this flower garland. But then the flower garland becomes sort of these like chains or this rope that he becomes their captive. But one of the rabbit maskers helps him escape, and they go into this cave, and they encounter a rock monster. And when they leave, they encounter this abstracticator. And these are the paintings that went with the second part of that. So there are more drawings, but this is just sort of the arc of the narrative from these two chapters. And so I was really interested in trying to do another chapter that was going to be about these two of the rabbit maskers who go off and have an adventure together. I wanted them to all be paintings on panel. This was the first panel, and you can see in the back there are these two sort of four ears sticking up behind this rock, and this was going to be sort of the start of that chapter. And then I started working with a different medium, more with oil stick and wax, and using that on canvas over panel. And I should go back and say that this is all work that I'm showing now at the Walter Mayfield Gallery. And so then that chapter sort of became, I really wanted to explore more using these different materials. And other images sort of came into my mind. The images weren't really about a sustained narrative, but they were sort of about the narrative. The narrative was the image. So this is oil and a wax medium. This is also oil, but in this one I've also used oil stick, which I really like. It gives this more of a feeling of drawing. Same, this is oil, and I think there's oil stick in this. And then we were in lockdown because of COVID. My studio building was closed for a while. And so I started working at home. And I wanted to use oil. I wanted to try to find a way to use oil that was not as, that didn't create a lot of toxic smells. And so I started with oil stick, and then I also started using more acrylic paint. I've always kind of used acrylic paint, mostly with work on paper, but I really like using these panels. And so this is acrylic and oil stick on panel. And as I was working here at home, the paintings became more sort of like journal entries. And yeah, they just sort of became more like a journal, like a diary. And using the acrylic, I was able to create a surface that made the oil stick, had a bit of grit in it, in the acrylic. And so it made it a lot more receptive for the oil stick to stick to. And it also created much more of a kind of rougher image. This one is just oil and oil stick. And I became really interested in having this figure in a landscape. And the title Escape, that was originally going to be the title of the story with the two rabbit masked men who go off and have an adventure together. But I sort of kept that title because it felt like, it just felt appropriate. But I'm still interested in this idea of figure in a landscape. And some of the landscapes are, some of the figures are more eccentric, more like characters. And the landscapes are sort of more eccentric. I really sort of wanted to play with the idea of shapes and creating space. This one is oil stick on an oil paper. It's a paper that you don't have to prepare. You can just work directly on it with oil. And then this is on a panel. And in some of the landscapes, I wanted them to have the sense of the landscape, a sense of space, but I also wanted to play with shape making. And also a kind of a feeling of light. And this one, I sort of wanted to play with the idea of this being like a stage, and that this character is sort of dancing, which I think of as a total liberating experience to dance. And that the trees would sort of become like this stage, the curtains in a stage. And then the canopy would be sort of the top part of the proscenium. And in using the oil sticks, it sometimes became very, I liked the chunkiness of it, and it became very tactile, and that's what this one was for me. It was just sort of this idea about having these large plants that almost feel that they're like these creatures that would eat you, and also looking out over this vast sort of space. And some of them have to do with this feeling of being in isolation, I guess. This one really sort of started with these sort of this chorus, I call them, on the bottom, and everything else sort of grew around it. And also have made some ceramic sculptures. They're terracotta sculptures, but then rather than glazing them, I used oil paint because I like the sort of mattness and that kind of almost like a pastel, chalk pastel feel. And that's the end of my the presentation of my work. So if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, John. This is Molly, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
One of the first is, how has San Francisco influenced you?
Well, San Francisco is a big influence on my work. I'm very interested in San Francisco. There are a lot of characters, and a lot of sort of what I call performative dress, and so I'm very interested in people sort of becoming these characters, and so that's one thing, and I think that's where I got this idea with having these characters who sort of wear these costumes, and that becomes sort of their identity. Also, Golden Gate Park, having that sort of forested area, which seems so fantastical, that also kind of really influenced my work, influenced the idea of using sort of landscape. But also, I'm also very interested in African masking, and it's in the bush is where the masked spirits live, and I sort of feel that way, like in San Francisco, in Golden Gate Park. That's where these forest spirits are. I had a long bus ride from my home to my studio, and it was very a raucous bus, and it was just always full of these characters and full of stories, and I think that's really I get to my studio and I feel like overwhelmed, and really trying to in one way to deal with all this, like this stimulus, was I tried to do portraits of people that sort of stuck with me from the bus. And eventually I tried to, listen to the stories, and, tried to capture those stories with images. And so that's where kind of this whole idea of storytelling with images, I think that's started with that. And it wouldn't have started if I hadn't been in San Francisco.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question is, did you do a lot of art when you were young? How has your childhood influenced your artwork?
Yes, I did do art when I was young. I didn't have art classes when I was in school, but in the summer, I would take these art classes. And I was always making drawings, and always making things. But I never really thought of art as a career. And I remember there was when I was a kid, there was an issue of Ebony magazine that had, I don't know, 50 Black artists, 100 Black artists, I can't remember exactly. But it was such a revelation, because I thought, wow, first of all, people can actually become artists as a career, and that they're Black artists. So.
Wonderful. Going along the same lines in terms of inspiration and childhood, there was a question, what was your transition like once you committed to being an artist? And was there any kind of reaction from your family? Because I know you were headed towards the medical profession and then you veered the other direction.
Yes. When I was at the University of Chicago, I took a class with an art class, and the teacher was Vera Clement, a painter, and I started learning more about, like art as a career, as something you would study, and I became really interested in art that was happening in Chicago. The images, the Chicago images, I really loved their work, and was able to study with two of the artists, well, more than two, but some of the artists from that group at the Art Institute. But yeah, no, it was a real surprise for my family. After college, I took a year off, and I worked at, I came to San Francisco actually, and I took some classes at the San Francisco Art Institute. And then I also worked at, went back to Benton Harbor, where I'm from, and worked at, took some classes at the School of the Art Institute, and I prepared a portfolio and applied to art school. But it was a big surprise for my family.
Are any of your characters based on yourself or your friends or historical figures?
That's a great question. No, I don't think no, they're not. They all just sort of pop into my head as I start working. So I guess they're based on something from my experience, but it's not something that's conscious, I think.
And have you ever considered working in animation?
I have never considered that. I did do a little animated video a long time ago. I don't even know if I could still find it, but I would like to do something like that. I think that's a project that hopefully one day I can do again.
There are a couple questions that sort of mention the coloring book. One was, I noticed that some of the areas of your art pieces were left with no color. Was this to allude to the coloring book theme, or did it have some other kind of meaning?
Yes, I like the idea of having some of the images with no color, and I think it's a way of inviting the viewer to come in. Let's see, maybe I can go back to some to step into the piece and sort of help complete it, so that it's like a sharing thing between me and the viewer. I like the idea of having the open areas where you really just sort of see the line, and then have that area where you see the line and it becomes like a form with the color. I think the color helps it become.
So following the line about the coloring books, the next question is, you mentioned that you enjoy coloring books because of their linear narratives. How do you come up with the characters and plot in the narratives of your own pieces?
Well, what I liked about the coloring books narratives is that they're not linear. that they kind of jump around in time. And I think that's kind of the way that I think and the way that I talk. So in my pieces, I don't know if I'm not really there. Things sort of follow sequentially, but not directly. I sort of like that there can be these leaps of time um, and between one panel and the next. I don't know if that really answered your question, but
Yeah, it absolutely does. But have there been other kinds of literature that have influenced you?
well, when I first started these, I really wanted to pull um, science fiction, from fables, from just family stories, um, just to pull all these things together to see how many different like narrative types I could incorporate into an image. And now it doesn't, it seems sort of automatic that all of these things, I just feel that they're there, so I don't have to do it so consciously. But yeah, so there were like, narrative stories. My father was a big storyteller and liked to tell stories to me when I was a kid. And I had a neighbor whose father was a really good storyteller, and all of his stories were sort of like these kind of horror stories. Uh, and so I just, thinking back on like storytelling seems to be an important thing for me.
The next question is, it starts, seems to have been an explosion of color with painters in the last 5 years. You have always used a lot of color, but your new work seems even more bold and bright. Is this related in any way to what other painters are doing?
Um, s- I, for some reason, the color in these newer paintings, no, I don't know if it's related to what other painters are doing. It's just that there's something about now that I just feel like the color. I've just become very interested in using color, and but I'm using color in a different way than I have before. I mean, I've always used color, but now I'm trying to with these paintings. There's less of a line, less of that coloring book line or the calligraphic line, and with these paintings, I kind of tried to use at most uh, four colors. I would have like like primary, like three primaries, um, and different ones for each painting. So sometimes I would have a cool red and a cool blue and a warmish yellow or a cool yellow. So I kind of played with that and just tried to use a limited palette, but to try to get as much color out of that limited palette.
Great. I have one last question. Who are your artist inspirations or artistic inspirations?
Um, I think my biggest inspiration are two of my teachers from the School of the Art Institute, um, Don Baum and Ray Yoshida. And they were both associated with the images, the Chicago images. And they just sort of, they introduced me to outsider art and art of other cultures and this sort of an outsider like quirky narratives and a way of sort of seeing appreciating sort of like everyday things, like odd shapes of rocks, odd pieces of wood, even things that you would find at thrift markets, thrift stores, that were sort of in some way, I guess not really surreal, but something that spoke to this to they were more than what they seemed. They sort of were evocative, and also, you know, they sort of encouraged me to trust intuition in making work, and intuition in the process of making it. So those two are probably my biggest influences, Don Baum and Ray Yoshida.
Wonderful. I'm going to end with a comment, actually, from the Dean of College of Communications and Fine Arts, Dean Alexander. He says, "Thank you for your presence and the smart, critical beauty of your work. I wish that I had these images as a Black gay boy growing up in the South. They present images of possibility, escape, adventure, and integration with the natural world, with the potentiality of being and becoming fully alive, and the extracticator as potentials of transformation, but also defining the self on your own terms. Love the work."
Oh, well, that's very nice. Thank you very much. That's very nice.
Hi, John. This is Karen. Would you comment a little bit? I'm so thrilled that Dean Bryant, Keith Alexander could come today to this talk, and were it not for Zoom, he probably would not have been able to meet you this way. Talking a little bit about opening up possibilities and how you have thought about your work in that way, in the depictions of your characters and how they interact with each other.
Well, I sort of think this whole this rainbow forest is a place where these characters can come and be their most truthful selves. And if that means wearing a butterfly mask, or if that means wearing a rabbit mask, or then that's how they sort of celebrate their individuality.
Mhm.
And I think that they, even though there are always there are these things that happen, I sort of feel like it's a positive place where they're all sort of helping each other.
I mean, I get that sense too, really, that there is the environment that your work conjures is a positive place, even in the pieces that you made at home, because you couldn't go to your studio, that are smaller scale and they feel a little bit more contemplative. There's still a kind of a beauty, a nurturing environment that your characters are in. Has your work ever veered in any other direction when characters might be more in a kind of state of agony or any kind of pain or suffering, or is that not something that typically would enter into the the narrative?
I think when that first chapter, the capture and escape of Mr. M, I don't know if there was necessarily pain, but there was this feeling of being taken from one place and dropped in a new place, and having to make your way through there and sort of learn the rules of this new environment. So I think that there's still that in the work of just, you know, trying to figure out the rules. But no, I generally think that it's a pleasant, I think it's generally a pleasant place to be.
Mhm. I think I muted myself. From group shows that you have been in, what have been kind of some of the highlights for you when your work has been in conversation with another artist that has been exciting?
Um, well, in the 30 Americans show, it was really exciting to meet all these artists. And it sort of, I feel like even though we didn't know each other, it was this um, common feeling among the work, um, of a kind of an openness and uh, um, new possibilities for image making.
Mhm.
And so that's been exciting. That was exciting.
I looked up that show online, I think even in Instagram too, and because it had so many, right, iterations, was it possible then to go to different um, locations and then kind of regroup with people? Did it become kind of like a bonding experience?
Um, yeah, well, the most exciting, well, they've all been exciting, but it was at the Corcoran in Washington, and that was really exciting because the Corcoran was a place where when I was in art school I would go to, and I never thought that my work would be there, but it so that was a lot of the artists came for that opening, and so it was nice to reconnect there. President Obama and Michelle Obama actually came to the show at one point. But the interesting thing about the 30 Americans is that each different venue, it was curated by a different curator. So
Mhm.
they pulled from the work that in the collection, but it was always arranged in a different way. So there was always a new conversation.
That seems wonderful.
That was great.
I really want to encourage people who are in Los Angeles and they're looking for something fun, because I find myself certainly trying to seek out things that could be fun, to pay the gallery, Walter Maciel, a visit. The gallery's on La Cienega. It's very conveniently located kind of south of Midtown. Um, all the requirements for social distancing are in place. The show is open through October 31st. Um, I think being in the presence of your work and then seeing how you have shifted in scale, John, from the paintings, the larger paintings, and then now the more intimate works on paper and on panel is really lovely. And so I'm going to pay a visit. I know that you have not been able to come down because of the pandemic,
Right.
but it's been delightful to have you in LA for this talk. And I thank you so much. And I hope that I personally am able to thank you in person
Yeah.
someday soon too.
Yes. Thank you
And
so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
it's been a pleasure. And I love your button because I noticed that right in the beginning when we started the webinar. It's great to see the I voted.
Oh,
So
good. I hope it's a gentle reminder and encouragement to please vote.
yes, yes, we need all the student voices, especially
Yeah.
even when you are not on campus. We still need you to vote. Thank you, John, so much. It's been wonderful having you as part of the series today. Thank
Thank
you,
you so much.
everyone.
Thank you.